In this fun conversation with Dallas Nachtigall from Bestowing the Brush, we hear about her nature study and nature journaling experiences in her homeschool, her family's tips and tricks, what she's learned, how Charlotte Mason has worked for her, and a whole bunch of great ideas and wisdom for all of you. Don't miss the lightning round. I am so excited, Dallas. Welcome to the show. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. And I've been looking at some of the content that you make online, and there's a lot of great stuff out there.
Yeah, thanks, Marley. Thanks for having me on. I think this is so fun to do. It's fun to connect with other people who do nature notebooking and nature journaling.
Great. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of people right now who are wondering how to incorporate some nature curriculum into a homeschool program, whether they've been homeschooling for a long time or whether they just started homeschooling recently. And nature study and nature journaling seem to be really hot topics right now. I just did a search for nature study, and it seems like right now, September of this year, people are searching for it more than ever before. So
Wow.
I think it's really, really fascinating. So could you just tell us a little bit maybe about the story of how you started homeschooling?
Sure. Yeah, I started homeschooling due to my husband, actually. He was homeschooled K through 12. And I just really liked the way he grew up, and he talked about getting to be in nature all the time. So that was definitely one of the family values that we wanted to impart to our kids, was a love of nature and just being aware of God's creation and building those observational skills and stewardship and all of those good things that we want our children to have. So I quickly found out about a woman named Charlotte Mason, who she lived long ago in the 19th century. And she wrote homeschool volumes on, basically she was kind of the first person to do homeschooling in the Western world. So she wrote volumes on it, and there's a whole group of people out there who do Charlotte Mason style education because it's a method. So it's very hands-on learning. It's very, a lot of it is based on nature and learning about things in our world because of what's been created. Yeah. So nature journaling is one of the things that we do, nature study. And what we start with, like, stories about nature, like literary tales that kind of follow animals and their habitats and their behaviors through story. And that sort of awakens their interest to what's out there and what is outside their door. So then we incorporate nature walks and then sketching in a nature journal. So one thing that I realized kind of right away was that a lot of people are very intimidated by drawing. And I think you and I have talked about this a lot. Just like if you had that initial skill, that you might have done it more often, that you might have journaled more often. So I have training in drawing and went to school for fine arts. So I kind of built a program myself, and I do have a course that's available for homeschool families that want to learn how to draw. And in my opinion, I think one of the best ways is to draw from nature and to learn kind of all those things all at one time. It's just so rich. So, plus it's kind of difficult. So I think if you start doing something difficult early on, that it like really builds your skills. Sort of, I don't know, it just kind of hyperdrive a little bit.
Yeah, so it sounds like at least with your course that you have it set up so that the adults and the kids are learning at the same time. Is that true?
Correct. Yep. So it can be a whole family experience. Oftentimes I see people, they've laid the laptop right there in the middle of their dining room table, and they're all kind of crowded around. And some of the best emails I get are from moms who are learning alongside their kids. And they're just so thankful and so eager for the drawing instruction because they just really hadn't ever been taught how to see something, or given that like regular amount of time in their day to practice. As you know, practice is so important with drawing. It's one of those habits that you can kind of forget to do for a while, and then it's like you got to work a little bit harder to get back on the wagon.
Yeah, definitely. That seems like such a revolutionary style of teaching or learning, though.
Sure. Yeah, I think specifically even Charlotte Mason education is a lot that way. It's a
Oh,
lot
really?
like, the parents also have learning to do, that we don't just stop learning when we leave high school or we leave college. It's a life.
Mhm.
So the things that we're learning in our own studies are going to inform how the children learn, and them seeing us learn is kind of like a modeling. So
Right.
I think for a parent or a mom to sit at the table with their kids and learn alongside the students, it shows a humility
Mm.
and a willingness that they are going to sit and learn some of these things. And I have friends who they want their students to learn violin, so they'll pick up their own violin and go with them to their practice sessions. And I think that's so great that it just keeps the parents kind of intellectually nimble as well as the
Mhm.
children. And they get to kind of see the parent like struggling through some things too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. One thing that I've noticed in my work with kids is that, especially like maybe with certain individuals and also with teens in general, but that buy-in is really critical. And if you can't get the buy-in from the kids, then it doesn't matter like how well thought out your curriculum is. And so it seems like in some ways having the adult trying to learn and modeling also is a potentially helpful thing for buy-in, because I think a lot of times we're like, all right, go learn the piano, and then the parent is doing something totally different, potentially just going on their phone. And I think that kids, they just see that, and especially teens, they just, that does not really, it's very hypocritical. So I didn't realize that in Charlotte Mason that was part of it as well, but I think that's really cool. So what do you um, in your course and for families, like how do you prep parents for that? Because, or do you ever like encounter resistance around that? I mean, it seems like a lot of people, what they want to do is actually plug their kids into something where the kids are okay, they're learning over there. Now I'm gonna go do my thing over here.
Right. No, that's a great question. It's actually the reason why I started my podcast. Um, I love listening to podcasts myself, and that's kind of the main way, because I have a busy life, that I continue to learn things. So I decided, well, why don't I just take what I know from my school experience and what I'm still currently reading and talk about it through the airwaves to moms for 30 minutes, 40 minutes while they can be doing the dishes. They can have me in their ears.
Mhm.
And I really liked presenting my philosophy on why we draw. So I think that those initial seeds of ideas are really important, because if you don't inform the parent as to why you think drawing and nature study is so important, they just won't have the motivation to go out there and do it, or to buy materials that are going to be satisfying enough for their kids to use,
Mhm.
or a course that will help them learn in the future.
Mhm.
So I really decided that I would create a podcast that would uh, that would educate parents on what drawing even is,
Mhm.
and how you could start to go about teaching it in your home, because I know a lot of parents they do want to be the teacher. They want to impart knowledge to their students, but sometimes they just need those things first. So it was very popular with just a very niche group of people, because they really wanted that information. So I'm thankful. You can find that on my website too if you haven't checked that out yet. But it's called Bestowing the Brush. So I just decided I'd read articles, commentate on them. I do some drawing lessons, some prompts, some things like that. But a lot of it is based on really old literature because, as you know, there's not a whole lot of drawing instruction in schools these days. So a lot of it is kind of Victorian era. So, there's a little bit of a language barrier there. So sometimes I'm like translating what an India rubber is, or uh, various art supplies that we don't have anymore. Or we just have so much more available to us now that I like to give parents ideas of new art supplies they might not know about. And really just making it seem like it's something they can do. That's not such a huge leap of faith that they can buy their kid a sketchbook and some paints, and they can start doing it today. And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Yeah, like how would you explain the difference between nature study and nature journaling, or how would you, for people who have heard of one but not the other, how would you compare those two concepts or terms?
Okay, so nature journaling and nature study, they're pretty closely linked together. I would say that nature study is more like the literature around what you're doing and learning more about the thing that you already know because you went out and you nature journaled about this concept or this thing that you're studying. So, for instance, we might be studying like fruiting trees in the fall because that's what happens in the fall in Nebraska is that we have some cherries on trees and we've got other things that are budding. So first we would go out and we would actually notice these things and we would ask like object lesson questions about them. What color is it? What is the shape of it? How many buds are coming off of the branch? What color is the branch? Is it a woody stem? Is it, a leafy stem? Things like that. And because now we have that actual knowledge, we can now take that knowledge to our studies and kind of learn around that. But especially with Charlotte Mason, the type of homeschooling that we do, we want the kids to have actual information that they've learned themselves and that
Right.
they've gotten their hands on and their eyes on.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the one thing that's different, I guess, about how we study science versus other homeschooling methods. But nature journaling is totally up to the student, but we kind of have these parameters around, the times that we're going to be out, if they want to go take it with them, if they want to do memory drawings back at home, making sure that they're also writing in it. It's not just about pictures, but it can be diagramming and it can be putting the stars where they are in the sky, and it can be painting a flowering tree. But it's also writing about the walk that they had and what happened on the walk and anything they noticed in the weather that day, things like of that nature.
Cool.
So yeah, it's very custom to the student, what the student is interested in.
So it sounds like nature study and nature journaling are complementary, and in some ways they're kind of overlapping. I think from just doing some searches online, it seems like a lot of people use the words almost interchangeably, or sometimes they'll say like how my family does nature journaling / nature study. So it seems like there's a lot of overlap there, and maybe one of the reasons why people who are doing Charlotte Mason style of homeschooling have really been excited about adopting a lot of the nature journaling books and stuff that John Muir Laws has been making is because Charlotte Mason in many ways has kind of it has kind of foresaw this, or has kind of incorporated this methodology into her style even before nature journaling was like a phrase.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really crazy actually to look into some of the archives and see these old nature notebooks from the late 1800s that the pages have started to yellow, but they did use high quality paints. So the pigments are all there and you see how things change through the seasons. And this was late 1800s in England. So think of the flora and fauna that's in like the Lake District. So
Right.
it's just really interesting to see these old students' work is still preserved, and it's kind of a legacy now. So
Yeah.
thinking of it that way too, that we'll probably get to pass these nature notebooks on to our
Mhm.
kids and our grandkids. So it's kind of like
That's
a
really
farmer's
cool.
almanac in a
Yeah.
way.
Cool. How have you noticed, like in your family, the practice of nature study and nature journaling, like within your family homeschooling? How has that, like, what have you noticed, like in your kids or in your family? From like, have you noticed anything or like any transferable skills that have come out of the nature study?
I believe that it helps with every area of study because you're talking about the habit of attention.
Hmm.
Um, I think really teaching those observational skills is a huge way to develop a habit of attention. Um, being, I guess, just in the best way possible, being aware of what's around you at all times. My kids are pretty perceptive, and maybe that's the main takeaway that I've seen in my own family is just not even with what they see, but like smells. They are really keen to figuring out what smells bad or why do they smell smoke right now. We actually are getting some of the smoke from
Wow.
the wildfires out here.
Wow.
Um, yeah. Um, but things like just paying attention, I think. Um,
Got it. Okay, cool. That
and
seems like such
yeah,
a huge and important life skill too.
yeah,
So I guess I'm curious. Your website and your course is called Bestowing the Brush, and your podcast is also called that, correct?
right.
So I'm curious. I mean, I love the alliteration in the name and everything, and I'm curious, like, why brushes? Like, looking through your stuff, it seems like, I mean, I know you do like charcoal also, which I'll ask you about in a second, but why brushes? What about brushes? Do you like, yeah, what's the story with the brushes?
What's the story with the brush? That's a good question. Well, speaking of Charlotte Mason,
Mhm,
there was a technique of watercoloring back when she was teaching that was called brush drawing. So it's
mhm,
kind of a vintage, I guess, technique. And her and a few other people kind of, I don't know if you want to say discovered it, but were practicing it like it's a Japanese art
mhm,
form. So I'm sure at some point somebody went over to Japan
mhm,
and kind of Englishized it.
mhm. Yeah.
um, but it's a way and a way to use your watercolor brush to do like design work.
Mhm,
And so if you can think of like Victorian era decorations, a lot of them are more ornate and there's brushwork in the china and things like that. Um, but it was that was also the golden age of watercolor painting. So John Ruskin, the famous Victorian art critic, he
mhm,
was alive in those times, and other artists who did primarily watercolor. So she thought that the best way for children to learn was with a brush.
mhm,
So she had them doing just pure brushwork in her
mhm,
schools.
mhm,
So, it's illustration time, it's drawing time. We're just going to take out our brushes and use one or two pigments of color to do an illustration of like a history tale that we've been learning about.
mhm,
Or if we're going to go nature journaling or come back and do a sketch in our nature notebooks, we're going to use a couple of reds and greens to do this berry, like this leafing berry or something. But she also thought it was one of the best ways to get the gesture of the
mhm.
plant life. Because as you know, plants are living, they grow, they bob in the wind, and they're living. So
Yeah.
she thought that a brush was actually better at capturing life
Mhm,
than charcoal, than pencil. So
mhm,
she just, for also simplicity's sake, I think, had her drawing instruction part of the day was brush drawing. So
mhm,
in that technique, you learn how to press the brush down and pick it up, how to be very fine with it, how to be more gestural with it. And also it helped a lot in their handwriting. So, I mean, that's another transferable skill that you asked earlier, is that because you've gained these skills with your hand, these hand skills, you're just going to be a little bit more able to do finer work with your hands.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. I
Yeah.
mean, I love brushes. I feel like brushes are one of those things, like especially in the like art catalogs, you know, you
Yeah.
start looking at they're kind of like the swords, I guess. Art, the closest thing we have to swords or sports cars maybe, but like you look in the art catalogs and you know, pigments can be pretty fancy and all that too.
Yeah.
But like the brushes are just like wow, and it's like, you know, these companies that have been making them for so long,
Yeah.
some of them, and like the materials, and there's you can definitely get really into it. And at the same time, it seems like right now in the nature journaling community, at least, people are super into the water brushes. So it almost feels
Yeah.
like this going in the opposite direction where, you know, it's like plastic is really convenient and everything, but it's like
Right.
these things, it's people love them, and the convenience for in the field and all of that, but it definitely doesn't have that kind of character. So like how do you feel? I've seen you use these before too. Like how do you feel about this compared to, you know, other brushes?
That's a great question. I use them all the time. I love them. But it is a different animal. It's not like a natural hair. It's not limp. It definitely springs back. So I think it has its use. And I think using a variety of materials is so important. So I do talk about that as well. Just making sure you don't just learn how to draw one way. But yeah, I take them with me, and I think they're really great for young kids who want to get into brush drawing. Just think of like telling a 5-year-old kid to take out his paint palette and to take out his little water things. Like, there's no way that in 20 minutes you're going to get all your stuff out, do a sketch, and put it all back without paint going everywhere.
Okay, this is great. Great segue. Thank you, Alice. This is perfect segue into, let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit, because I've worked with kids, and a lot of the programs that I've worked in have had like mixed ages, and we've had like full day like nature, some of them pretty rambunctious programs. And there's been times where people are like, they know that I teach nature journaling, and they're like, here, like, let's do nature journaling with the kids. And I think there's been times where it's worked great, and then there's been other times where I've just been like, you know, we don't have, like, especially in a program where there's not like a clear like expectation, or there's not like a clear container around like art or nature journaling, it's been hard to introduce, and in some cases with adults too. So like, let's start getting into the nitty gritty of what it's actually like bringing the art supplies to the students and kids. Like, what age are your kids that you're working with at home?
My kids are 8, 6, and 5.
Okay.
And we've been doing this for about 3 years. But I've worked with all ages and adults too.
Okay, so can you like give us like kind of like a almost like a play by play, like say like when was the last time you did like a nature study or nature art session with them, and kind of like how you what your game plan was and how that progressed?
Okay. So what I would do is I would have given them like several weeks of drawing lessons before ever going out. I would never expect to teach a lesson outside the home. I would rather teach those skills separately and help them be prepared in their mind and in their abilities with doing that. Because to take 5 kids out and say, okay, we're going to nature journal now, half of them are going to go, what? I don't even know how to draw. So, and you know, also getting them their own little kit, so it kind of personalizes it to them, and they're excited to use materials that they've never used before. So anyway, I would have taught some drawing lessons prior, and then we go on hikes all the time. But in the hikes where we don't bring our stuff, I will ask like those object lesson questions that help them like getting attuned to what's around them. Taking any opportunity, if there's a cool moss growing on a tree, to stop and ask a few questions about it. And what you look at and observe carefully, it becomes like a photographic memory in your mind. So I think just being aware of those skills, that you're trying to be intentional about building those. And then I think you can combine something. But with young kids, I would definitely keep the lessons short. I would definitely keep snacks with you, water with you, have a definite time set aside to do that, and not expect that you're going to stop every 5 minutes to sketch everything. The backpacks that they need to take the stuff out if they want to, but also keeping it with the little kids, keeping it really low pressure. If they don't want to sketch anything today, I'm not going to make them sketch anything that they're not interested in. So it's maybe another thing for another day. I would say probably just building those drawing skills outside of the nature lesson times is pretty critical, because then if they want, like, a teenager, if they want to take their stuff with them that day, then they would have those abilities to go out and do that. And then it wouldn't be such a hindrance to have all your paints with you. You're going to figure that out, and you're going to build that as a skill eventually. So.
Got it. So it sounds like what you're saying is, and I've heard it said that learning 2 new processes at the same time is exponentially more difficult than learning 1 new process at a time. And it seems like, with kids who are still learning how to grasp a pencil and learning the kind of eye-hand coordination, plus, okay, now you're in nature looking at things, plus you have to carry the stuff with you and just the logistics of it, combined with like learning about nature and observing. It sounds like what you're saying is really essential, is separating those skills out and kind of learning them one by one, and then combining them later. Okay.
Yeah, you can also too, I didn't mention, if you are a family and you're a homeschool family, you can also just take 1 set of supplies with you, and someone can decide to paint that day in like the family nature notebook, or decide how you're going to pass it around that day. That way, if you don't want to bring 6 different sets with you, or however many kids you have, that really reduces the chaos.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that. I spoke with someone recently who was, I spoke with Bethan from Australia, and she, she has I think her son is 3 right now, and she was describing nature journaling with really young kids, and that it can be good to have the parent and the kid nature journaling in the same book. Like, what have you experimented with in terms of use? Like, I've never heard anyone talk about a family nature journal before. Could you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, I would just keep something accessible at all times to your kids, whether they're in the home or taking it with us. So I would take the notebook and the pens and the paints with us every time we went to the park or outside for an extended amount of time. And I just let everybody know, like, hey guys, today I have the nature journal. If you wanna make a sketch today, there's time for that. So keeping it really low pressure like that too. It's not, you have to make a sketch in your nature notebook today. But yes, also just, I think the kids seeing the parents making a habit of it too. So I would go over to the nature notebook and I would make an entry about it. And one time they saw me painting the moon, and my oldest son the other day just remembered that. And that was 4 years ago. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even realize he was watching me do that. And he said, yeah, I remember you painting the moon that one night. So
yeah, that's really cool. I mean, and that's really, that reminds us as adults interacting with kids, whether they're our own or not, of how impactful the time that we spend with them is. And, him noticing that instead of just like having all these memories of like the parent or the adult, being on their device, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really great. I love this family nature, like a communal family nature journal concept. I'm gonna have to think about that one more. But one thing that I want to ask you about already, and you brought it up with the family nature journal, is this idea of pressure. Specifically, you mentioned the importance of having low pressure. So that's something I'm always curious about, especially with homeschool families where the parents are also the teachers. But like, how do you? And I think the part of California where I live, there tends to be like pretty free range or like unschooled kids a lot in the homeschool families. And so like, how's it? How do you find that balance with like pushing versus like just having something as an option? And like, what has been your experience with that?
It's a good question. I think going back to what I said earlier, the motivation that someone has to do something, it has to be a pretty powerful idea. So that's why we like to read really good nature literature. And I don't know if you've heard this term, but there's something called nature lore that's like, it's like those literature tales, stories about animals. It's like Burgess, like Burgess bird stories are a good example. To really capture their imagination, to make them want to go find out for themselves, I think is important. So if they don't have any initial good ideas as to why they want to do this, then they probably won't do it. But hopefully those initial motivating, rich ideas about the world around them will at least make them interested in the idea. But then also, yes, to see their parent trying to do it as well, or even just keeping a log of all the birds that they see at their bird feeder. Something we used to do is we'd keep a bird feeder out on the back deck. And when a new bird came to the feeder, it was like, let's make this an event. Like, this is exciting. A new bird came. Like, what does it look like? What do its tail feathers look like? Does it have a crest? What color is around the eyes? And then writing it down in our calendar, it was just as simple as that. And so then it made them excited. Like, how many other birds are we going to find at the feeder this year? Oh, well, that one only comes for 3 months, and this one comes in the winter, but not in the summer. And those can just be really motivating ideas for like gaining that attention towards those things.
That is really interesting. I've never thought about that angle on intrinsic motivation for interest in nature. And I'm so curious about that because, it makes me wonder, like, if kids or in families where they're not reading about nature lore or anything that makes them really excited about it, like, how does that impact, like, whether they're interested in it? And also, I'm curious about if the adults aren't like intrinsically motivated to learn about nature and aren't actually, showing that excitement about the birds coming to the bird feeder, like, what is that like? It feels like that's sort of like a self-perpetuating kind of a little bit worrisome like direction away from nature in a lot of ways.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And I think that is kind of one of the hallmarks of a Charlotte Mason education is that real general curiosity of the natural world. She also talks about like hiring a naturalist once in a while to do a group session, to go on a hike with them, to help the kids understand that these are real scientific pursuits and that there are people out there who love birds, who love the ecosystems and love studying things like that. And the excitement that those people have when they're instructing you on a walk is pretty fascinating and pretty motivating. So, I like to encourage moms too, that if there's someone in your area who is an expert on X, Y, or Z, see if you can at least have them come talk or go on a walk with them and find out for yourself. And a lot of homeschool moms will actually just get together themselves with these naturalists and say, hey, just teach me some stuff because we're supposed to go on nature walks with our kids and we don't know what we're looking for. So
Cool. Wow, that's great. So those are some really good, I think, tips and stuff for people who are homeschooling and doing nature study at home. What would you recommend for people who have don't have very much nature access? And I think this is something that happened to people specifically this year, where a lot of parks were closed and stuff. But like, what kind of ideas or recommendations do you have for people who feel like they don't really have access to nature?
Well, I think that it is a fallacy that we don't have access to nature. I think everyone does, even if you're just going on a walk in your neighborhood. There's lots of unkept yards around here. There's lots
Yeah.
of different grasses that grow out, and there's always the sky. You probably have a few windows in your house. You can bring nature to you, like I said before, with the bird feeder, or keep a rain gauge so that you always know what the rainfall is like. There's also always looking at the weather and the seasonal changes too. I think even sometimes just studying how your neighborhood changes, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, there's always this in the winter, there's one of the roofs of the house that has this odd, like, ice that forms on it because of the way the sun hits it at certain times of the year. And I always see that in the morning, and I always want to do a sketch of it because it's such a weird shape.
That's really cool.
Which is kind of like being like, oh, well, why does the siding of the house frost that weird way? And then maybe realizing, oh, they have a huge tree in their backyard that is keeping sunlight away from it or something. So yeah, just I think being aware of your surroundings in general. And then there's always going to the grocery store, just shopping seasonal produce, flower arrangements on your table, things like that.
Cool. So nature is pretty much everywhere. That's really great. So another thing I was wondering is, do you have any like, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of this in your course for nature study and art for families, but like, do you have any like specific tips or like little like techniques? Like, I feel like for someone who's been doing this for a while and is teaching about it, you probably have some cool tricks up your sleeve. Like anything that, if you could just share with someone who's kind of new to this or who's been doing it for a while, like one little like practical nugget that they could, that you feel is a really valuable nugget. What would something like that, what kind of things like that do you have?
Ooh, I have a good one. Okay, you all have a window. You all probably have a dry erase marker. Trace your neighbors, the architecture in their house on your window. So it'll help you understand like the weird angles of things that they maybe appear to be like 90 degrees, but they're actually 45 degrees.
Oh, that sounds really fun. I bet kids will be really excited to get a draw on the window also.
Or to have your sister or brother go outside the window and do their portrait. Do a little portrait on your window. I love window pane drawing. It's the best.
Cool. Yes, that is an awesome one. I'm so glad I asked that question because that is not what I was expecting. So do you feel like you're ready for the lightning round?
Exciting.
And if you could do some nature art or nature journaling anywhere on Earth, where would you go?
Ooh, a desert.
Ooh, okay. If you could take your family and nature journal on a macro level or on a micro level, what would you most want to look at with them?
Probably macro. We'd have to go up in a helicopter and do like aerial views. I think that'd be so fun.
Cool. Okay. Would you rather nature journal plants or animals?
Plants.
Okay. If you had to go to a desert island, a desert island with your family, I guess each person might have a different kit, but what 5 nature journaling or nature study tools would you bring with you? Supplies.
Ooh, definitely a compass. Can't get lost.
Okay. Well, don't worry about survival stuff, but like your art.
Art stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I've got this little travel pack that I love. My travel paints for sure. Probably a water brush.
Okay.
A net of cones, amazing watercolor sketchbooks.
Okay.
And so that's 3.
Mm-hmm.
I got to have something to wipe it off on. So like a piece of cloth
Okay.
to wipe off my paint and a micron pen.
Ooh, okay. Good job. And if you could nature journal with any historical figure, who would you nature journal with?
John Ruskin.
Okay. You already had that one all ready to go. If you could have a nature superpower or art superpower, what would it be?
Ooh. I want to have complete color mastery.
Like being able to match colors perfectly?
Yeah.
Okay, and then last question. If you could have a bird's view or a fish's view, which would you rather get to see?
Fish.
Okay, well, especially since you already have the flying around, you already have the macro view in the helicopter with your
Yeah.
family. Nice job in the lightning round. That was
Thanks.
awesome. Now,
So fun.
I'm so glad we did that because I'm really curious. Tell us a little bit about your sketchbook.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Annetta Cohn of
Annetta from Nature Sketches. Okay.
Sketches. She makes these awesome books.
Oh my gosh.
They are just beautifully crafted, cold press paper. She hand sews the binding.
Wow.
Yeah, they're amazing. So and I like the size of it too.
That is really nice.
It's really, love the paper quality. I might want it slightly bigger. She also has this pen.
Oh, nice.
Pen case to slip a little pen through.
Definitely. Okay, cool. This has been really awesome. I wonder what motivation you have for people who are, any like words of motivation for people who are new to homeschooling, or people who have been homeschooling for a while but haven't incorporated nature study or nature journaling.
I would say to just do something. Do whatever you can, because starting is the hardest part. So don't worry about things being perfect. If you have young kids, paint's going to go everywhere. Just roll with it. Just roll with it. And I think to have like that happy atmosphere around what you're doing is the most important. So remember that it's a joyful thing that we get to do. Not everyone gets to study nature. So keeping those things in mind, that it's something that is a privilege for sure.
Cool. That is so awesome. And then for people to find out more about your online course or any of the other stuff that you're up to, or the podcast, do you want to share any places where people can go to find out more?
Yeah, go to my website, www.bestowingthebrush.com. My podcast is called Bestowing the Brush. And I'm on Instagram. I'm very active there. Love to chat with you. So Bestowing the Brush on Instagram, and YouTube channel as well.
Great. Yeah, I'll put links down in the description below, and people can just click on those and head right over. Well, awesome. Dallas, thank you so much. It's been really fun, and I'm super excited about all the people who are homeschooling for the first time and adding nature study and nature journaling to their curriculum. So
absolutely. Good to talk to you too, Marley. Thanks.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Bye.